Thank you, Acting President. And well, I don't know, it feels like parents fighting, doesn't it? You know, and we both know that the major parties are able to manipulate legislation and to manipulate the system to their advantage. And I know that I heard Mr Finn crying poor and Mr Talama saying we would never do that. However, we know both of you take advantage of whatever opportunity you can. And I don't think, it's avoidance, not evasion, is that right? That's where there's that very fine line between what's legal and what's not. So I'm happy to lend my support to Mr Hayes, and I think it picks up on, you know, Reason Party policy, and I think it probably picks up on a lot of us on the crossbench, and would have similar policies. And in fact, you know, we did some work on this, and certainly during the debate in the last term, we worked with Mr Talamas and on trying to find, and obviously Mr Jennings, on trying to find a pathway forward that did give us the system that we as a community deserve. And we want, and that's what we want the public to trust in us. And when the public doesn't, that's when it's really hard to bring them along with change. And as we saw with the Centre of Public Integrity only just 2 weeks ago, they released a paper called Integrity Inadequacies, and that was particularly focusing on Victoria. And they said that our state frameworks were falling short when compared to other jurisdictions. And they went on to say that, you know, there might be a dinner where Mr Jepp is the lead speaker, and people are spending thousands of dollars to hear the wise words of Mr Jepp. But we know that the Palmer on offer at Mr Jepp's fine dinner did not cost thousands of dollars. So the difference between the cost of running the event and the fee needs to be explicitly captured as a donation. And I think this is certainly what Mr Hayes was going to in his contribution today, and also in his motion. And that is actually what New South Wales does. So while New South Wales, and I certainly think that our legislation would try and capture that, I don't know whether it does adequately. We know that it excludes gifts between registered parties, and I think that is a significant loophole. So we can tighten these donation rules, but I think that the better solution to this problem, and it's certainly the Centre of Public Integrity concurs, is that we cap election spending. And I think that is actually where we could make some great, we could really disincentivise, you know, big donations, disincentivise fundraising. And as Mr Talamas knows, that was exactly what I negotiated last term as part of the review. So they put an amendment into the electoral legislation amendment bill back in 2018. So that a review was to be conducted, and that was to happen after this election, and in that, whether the Act should be further amended to provide for a cap on political expenditure, and if so, whether the cap should apply generally or to specific persons or entities, the value of the cap, the consequences of a failure to comply with the cap. So that body of work is coming up. So after this election, we will be looking at that cap, and I think that actually is where we can limit the relevance and maybe the undue influence of donations. And this is also from Professor Chu Cheong Tham from Melbourne Law School, and they would also concur that the absence of limits on election campaign spending in the Victorian legislation risks placing pressure on political donation caps as parties and candidates seek to meet unabated demand for campaign funds. If the bill had provided for limits on spending, they may have curbed the impact of an uneven flow of public and private funds that will result from the enactment of the limits. And anyway, he goes on to talk more about this. So I think with the independent review due next year, I'll find it hard to believe that the expert panel wouldn't come to the same conclusion. And we've seen this, and I think Mr Hayes goes to that in his point about Canada. That is one of the things that Canada does, that there is a cap on spending. The same in the UK, the same in New Zealand. And this is certainly, I think, the way that we can get meaningful change in this. We can certainly curb what the perceived undue influence that donations have in our democratic process. So, yep, I have, I see no problem in broadening the definition of donation, and I was listening to Mr Talamas and watching him shake his head during some of this as well, that yes, they did broaden that definition and it did capture a number of areas that had not been captured previously. But, as I say, there's going to be an independent review after this election, and I welcome that review. I think without being unkind, Mr Hayes, I think that review actually will hopefully go to what you're doing, and possibly more than us talking on a Wednesday afternoon. As delightful as it has been to be here for this. Thank you.